In the Bronze Age cradle, where empires etched their names in stone and blood, Babylon's gardens defied heaven, and ziggurats stabbed the clouds like spears aimed at eternity. Amid this turmoil, a quiet revolution was born. A single voice would rise above the gods of gold and temples of fire. It would call a people to a land unseen, a covenant that would outlast thrones and temples, a promise carved into history itself. This is the story of ancient Israel. Shepherds became kings, slaves shattered empires, and a people lost everything but preserved what no sword could destroy. Their journey began with one man, Abraham, whose footsteps across the earth carried more than livestock. They carried the future of nations. If you've made it this far, you're clearly invested in this story, and we can't help but wonder, why haven't you subscribed yet? We pour our heart and soul into bringing these stories to life for you, so if you've enjoyed the journey, hit that subscribe button and join our community. And hey, if you're still holding back, we'd love to hear why in the comments. Seriously, tell us what's stopping you. Is it the content, the pacing, or just not feeling it? Drop a comment. We're listening. Also, let us know where you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories reach. So, don't be shy. Share your location and connect with fellow viewers around the world.
In the ancient world, where the air was thick with the scent of incense and the clamor of merchants trading in the shadows of colossal monuments, towering ziggurats and pyramids reached toward the heavens, asserting the dominance of gods and kings. Babylon's majestic hanging gardens clung to the earth, defying the very laws of nature, while the mighty ziggurats of Mesopotamia stood as eternal symbols of mankind's attempt to reach the divine. Each civilization seemed to carve its name into the sands of time, only to watch as it slipped away, its temples crumbling, its rulers forgotten, and its empires erased by the winds of history. But in the heart of this ancient world, a small, fertile land, cradled between the empires of Egypt to the west and Mesopotamia to the east, lay like a jewel, Canaan. This land, though not yet touched by the grandeur of the great civilizations, was destined for something far more profound than mere conquest or wealth. It would be the stage upon which the most audacious experiment in human history would unfold. The great powers, Egypt with its colossal pyramids and ancient priests, and Mesopotamia with its cities of science and magic, looked upon this land as a prize to be won, a strategic foothold between two of the world's greatest empires. To them, Canaan was nothing more than a land of grain, olive groves, and natural riches, ripe for the taking. But for those who walked its sun-kissed hills and dusty valleys, this land was a promise, one that could not yet be seen by human eyes, but would one day echo through the corridors of history. Picture the vibrancy of Babylon's markets, the air thick with the hum of traders hawking precious stones and fine silk, their voices weaving a tapestry of commerce and ambition. In the shadow of the great ziggurat of the pulse of the ancient world beat with the rhythm of civilization's most daring dreams. Further south, the grandeur of Egypt's pyramids loomed over the Nile, where pharaohs, regarded as gods on earth, etched their names into stone for eternity. The river, a lifeline of culture and power, coursed through the desert as Egypt's priests, scribes, and warriors shaped a dynasty that stretched across the ages. Here, in the fertile floodplains, the idea of immortality was born, not just in the afterlife, but in the material grandeur that would outlast the pharaohs themselves.
And then there was Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, where the Euphrates and Tigris conspired to create fertile plains. This was the land of law, science, and the written word. Sumerians and Akkadians built cities like Uruk, where the earliest forms of writing, the cuneiform script, began to etch the stories of mankind into clay. Here, kings rose to rule, their names immortalized in epic tales like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which spoke of the gods and the frailty of men. In these great cities, the foundations of civilization were laid: writing, architecture, astronomy, and law, and all of it cast under the shadow of the gods who watched from their temples. Between these towering giants of history, Canaan was a land of rugged beauty and raw potential, far from the soaring grandeur of the great civilizations, but just as rich in destiny. With its lush valleys, its hills scattered with olive groves and vineyards, and its bountiful grain fields, Canaan was a fertile jewel at the crossroads of the ancient world. It was a land of both opportunity and conflict, its cities fortified against the encroaching powers of Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet its people, who toiled the soil and tended the herds, were united by something much greater than the kingdoms that sought to claim them. They were bound by an unseen force, an ancient promise that would one day shift the balance of the world forever. As the great powers clashed on the battlefields of history, as kings and conquerors vied for dominion over the lands of riches and glory, a whisper began to echo across the hills of Canaan, a whisper that could not be silenced no matter how fierce the winds of war or how grand the empires. This whisper was not of conquest or wealth, but of covenant. A promise had been made to a man named Abraham, who had walked this land not as a king, but as a servant to a higher calling. It was a promise more potent than any kingdom, more enduring than any empire, and it would reshape not just Canaan, but the entire course of human history. The mighty forces of Egypt and Mesopotamia, with their proud kings and towering cities, may have seen Canaan as nothing more than a prize to be claimed. Yet the land had already been marked for something far greater. In a world defined by the rise and fall of empires, it would be a new kind of kingdom, a kingdom not bound by borders or walls, but by faith and covenant, that would emerge from these hills. And it would be a kingdom that would not only endure, but spread across time, transcending the empires that sought to claim it.
So, as the ancient powers clashed, as kings and warriors plotted their next move, the land of Canaan remained poised for destiny, a destiny that would unfold not in the shadow of ziggurats or pyramids, but in the humble promise of a people who, one day, would become a light to the nations. The promise, the covenant, the whisper, that was the true power of this land. And it was in this moment, amidst the rise of ancient civilizations, that the seeds of Israel's story were planted, deep in the soil of Canaan. The world would never be the same. Amid the shifting sands of the Mesopotamian plains, where the heat of the sun bends the horizon and golden temples rise like the hands of man reaching toward the heavens, there is a moment that will alter the course of history. A moment that will transcend the golden idols and mighty kings of the ancient world. It is in this cradle of civilization, where the hum of merchants fills the air, the echo of divine authority rings out. One voice, amid the noise of empires, stands alone. It is the voice of a man, not of royalty or priesthood, but a simple shepherd named Abraham. Abraham is not a king, nor a prophet, nor a conqueror. He is not rich in the wealth of cities like Ur, nor does he possess the divine right of kings as the pharaohs of Egypt. He is a man of faith, humble, with few material possessions, yet rich with a spirit that is about to change the very fabric of history. The journey Abraham is called to embark on is not one of conquest or wealth. It is one that will transcend borders, mountains, and seas.
It is the kind of journey that rewrites destinies, shapes civilizations, and alters the very idea of what it means to be chosen by a power greater than man. This is not simply the story of a man leaving one place for another. It is the story of the birth of a promise that would transcend every empire, every throne, every kingdom, and every idol.
The call comes at a time when the world is deeply immersed in its pantheon of gods, gods of fertility, of war, of the rivers and mountains. These gods are not unknown to Abraham, who lives in the heart of Sumerian culture, a place where the powerful influence of temples and their high priests govern the hearts of men. In a world where divine favor is sought through sacrifice and ritual, the call to Abraham is not just unexpected, it is radical. It asks him to leave everything familiar, his family, his land, his idols, and even the gods of his ancestors. The call is not an invitation to join a revolution of armies or armies of men. It is a quiet whisper from the Almighty, a command to leave the comfort of the known and venture into the chaos of the unknown. And so Abraham, without hesitation, heeds the call. He gathers his family and his wealth, sets his face toward a land promised to him, though he does not yet know its name or its shape. His journey is not that of a wanderer without purpose, but of a man walking by faith, driven by a covenant that has no physical proof, but is grounded in a promise greater than any earthly kingdom. In this moment, when Abraham sets foot on unfamiliar soil, the world of empires and kings is momentarily forgotten. The cities of Mesopotamia, Babylon, Nineveh, stand as towering testaments to the power of man. They are cities built on the labor of countless people, on the faith of thousands who pray to gods they can see, touch, and appease. But here, in the barren wilderness beneath a sky full of stars, Abraham hears a voice unlike any other, a voice not tied to stone or temple, not to the grandeur of kings, but to something far greater, far more eternal.
The voice of the Almighty speaks not just to Abraham, but to his descendants. "I will make of you a great nation," it says. "Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as the grains of sand on the shore." For Abraham, this is not a distant, abstract promise. It is a living, breathing reality that stirs in his soul. He stands beneath the vast expanse of the night sky, and for the first time, he can see beyond the confines of his own life, beyond his limited vision of what is possible. The stars above are not just distant lights. They are the future of a nation born not from the strength of armies, but from the strength of faith, from a covenant sealed in the heart of God. The promise extends far beyond mere numbers or land. It is a promise of legacy, of a people chosen not for their might, but for their faithfulness to the unseen God. The land to which Abraham is called is a land flowing with milk and honey, a place that, though foreign and unknown, is more than just a destination. It is a promise, a place where a nation will grow from the seed of Abraham's obedience, a place where God's people will find their identity, their purpose, and their divine calling. And though Abraham cannot yet see it, the land will be the birthplace of a nation whose story will echo through time, shaping the future of the world in ways he cannot yet understand. This is no mere journey. It is not a pilgrimage to a physical place, but to a promise that transcends time and space. It is a revolution, not of swords or armies, but of hearts and minds. It is a covenant that begins not in the halls of kings, not in the chambers of temples or the courts of pharaohs, but in the quiet obedience of a man who trusts in a voice from the heavens. Abraham's faith will become the foundation upon which a people, a nation, and ultimately, a world will be built.
In a world where power is measured in gold, where kings sit on thrones of stone, Abraham is called to walk in a faith that promises nothing but the fulfillment of a divine word. And it is this faith, tested through trials and triumphs, that will set the course for the unfolding history of Israel. A history that will outlast the rise and fall of empires and define the spiritual legacy of nations for millennia to come. The calling of Abraham is the moment when the ordinary becomes extraordinary, when the seemingly insignificant man from Ur becomes the father of a people who will shape the destiny of the world. It is in this moment, beneath the vast sky, that the seed of Israel is planted, not in the soil of Canaan, but in the heart of a man who chooses to believe in a promise greater than anything he can see. And so, with each step he takes, each journey into the unknown, Abraham carries with him not just the weight of his own life, but the weight of a destiny that will transform the world. This is the beginning of a revolution in human history, a revolution that will rise not from the strength of kings, but from the quiet trust of a man who believed in a promise from the Almighty. And as Abraham stands beneath the stars, a covenant is born, not of earthly kingdoms, but of faith.
Isaac, the miracle child, born when the world had almost forgotten the power of divine promise, Isaac carries the weight of a covenant that stretches back to the very beginning. His birth was no ordinary event. It was a promise fulfilled in the most unlikely of ways, born to Sarah, who had been barren for decades, and to Abraham, whose faith had moved mountains. Isaac was the living proof that God's word, no matter how impossible it seemed, would always come to pass. But Isaac's life was not to be defined by battlefields or grand victories. His legacy would be quieter, more subtle, one of preserving the promise, a bridge between the faith of his father and the nation that would come through his descendants. Isaac's path was peaceful compared to the storm that surrounded his father's legacy. He was not a king or a prophet, but a man of steady faith. He married Rebekah, a woman chosen by God to be the mother of the next generation of Israel. Their lives were simple, yet full of divine moments. They prayed for children, and in time, God answered with twin sons, Esau and Jacob. The world would later come to know the tension between these brothers, two sons born from the same womb, but destined for very different futures. Though Isaac's role is quieter, his importance cannot be understated. The promise he carried was not merely about the land or the descendants. It was about faith in God's plan, a trust that would endure through centuries of trials, exiles, and conquests. Jacob, Isaac's second-born son, was destined for more than peace. His very name, supplanter, was a harbinger of the struggle that would define his life. Jacob was a man of cleverness, a man who would, through deceit and trickery, steal his brother's birthright and the blessing that was meant to be his. But this was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning. Born around circa 1850 BCE, Jacob's rise to power would not be due to the strength of his armies or the wealth of his lands, but by the power of faith, a faith that would be tested time and time again. After deceiving his father and stealing Esau's blessing, Jacob fled for his life, knowing that his brother, wronged and angry, would seek revenge. Alone in the desert, Jacob would have a vision that would change his life forever. In a dream, a ladder stretched from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending upon it. At the top of the ladder stood God, who repeated the covenant that had been made with Abraham and Isaac. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring." This moment, beneath the vast star-filled sky of Bethel, marked the beginning of Jacob's transformation. God had not abandoned him despite his deception. Instead, God had chosen him to carry the torch of the covenant. No longer was he the deceiver, but the chosen one, Israel. And with that new name, a new identity was born. From this moment on, Jacob would be Israel, and through him, the 12 tribes of Israel would be born. Jacob's life, full of struggle and transformation, would become the blueprint for the nation of Israel. His 12 sons, each born to one of his 4 wives, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah, would go on to form the 12 tribes of Israel. These sons would rise and fall, each one marked by his own struggles, victories, and flaws. But through them, God's covenant would continue, passed down from generation to generation. Among these sons, Joseph, born to Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, would rise to prominence. His life was not one of quiet faith or simple obedience, but of dramatic twists and turns, marked by betrayal and triumph. Joseph, born around circa 1750 BCE, was a dreamer. He was the favored son, the one who wore the coat of many colors, a symbol of his father's special affection. His brothers, jealous of his position and resentful of his dreams, which foretold of their bowing before him, betrayed him. They sold him into slavery, casting him into the pit of Egypt, believing they had rid themselves of the brother they could not understand. But Joseph's journey was far from over. As he descended into the darkness of slavery, God's hand was upon him. He was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's guard, and despite his circumstances, Joseph found favor in his master's eyes. But fate, as always, had more in store. Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's appearance and strength, sought to seduce him. Joseph, standing firm in his faith, rejected her advances, and for his righteousness, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Yet even in the depths of prison, Joseph's faith did not falter. God continued to be with him, granting him the ability to interpret dreams, a gift that would soon take him from the dungeons of Egypt to the highest courts of Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh, troubled by dreams that no one could interpret, heard of Joseph's ability and summoned him to his court. Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, foretelling 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, impressed the king so much that he appointed Joseph as the governor of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Joseph's rise from slave to ruler was nothing short of miraculous. It was divine intervention in its purest form. When famine struck the land, it was Joseph's foresight that saved Egypt and the surrounding nations, including his own family. Jacob, unaware that the son he had mourned as dead was now a ruler of Egypt, sent his sons to Egypt in search of food. Joseph, recognizing them, could have taken revenge. He could have allowed his brothers to suffer as they had caused him to suffer. But Joseph chose forgiveness. He revealed his identity to his brothers, and instead of condemning them, he invited them to come and live in Egypt, where they would be provided for during the famine. Joseph's story is one of incredible suffering, but also one of incredible redemption. It shows that no matter the betrayal, no matter the circumstance, God's plan will always prevail. Joseph's rise to power saved not only his family, but the very people of Israel, ensuring that the covenant promise would continue. Joseph's legacy is far-reaching. It is through his wisdom and his faithfulness that Israel finds refuge in Egypt, setting the stage for the years of oppression and eventual liberation that will follow. His story is a reminder that God's plans are often hidden in the most unlikely places, and that through faith, even in the darkest moments, the light of providence will shine through.
Under the scorching Egyptian sun, the Hebrews labor in silence. They are unseen, their sweat mixing with the dust of the earth, their backs bent beneath the heavy weight of Pharaoh's command. The towering monuments of Egypt rise like gods to the heavens, monuments to power, to control, to empire. But beneath those grand structures, in the shadow of Pharaoh's splendor, the Hebrews toil. They are slaves, bound not just by chains, but by the invisible force of oppression, driven into the earth by the Pharaoh's will. The Pharaoh, once a king who welcomed Joseph and his family into Egypt during times of famine, now looks upon their descendants with suspicion. What was once a people cherished for their wisdom, their ingenuity, and their ability to save Egypt from starvation, has now become a perceived threat. As the Hebrews grow in numbers, as their children multiply, Pharaoh's fear grows with them. His empire, vast and powerful, begins to tremble. The Hebrew people, now too many to be contained, are seen as an obstacle to Egypt's future, a time bomb of rebellion that must be crushed before it can ignite. And so, Pharaoh's heart turns cold. What was once a kingdom of benevolence toward the Hebrews becomes a kingdom of cruelty. In the depths of his terror, Pharaoh commands a decree to strike at the very heart of Israel. Every male child born to the Hebrews must die. His voice, laden with fear and tyranny, echoes across Egypt's walls, calling for the slaughter of innocent infants, casting a shadow of death over the entire nation. The Nile River, Egypt's lifeblood, now runs red with the blood of Hebrew children drowned at Pharaoh's command. It is in the midst of this river of death that a child is born, a child whose survival will defy the very will of Pharaoh. Moses. His name will become synonymous with deliverance, with the breaking of chains. But at this moment, he is nothing more than a helpless child, hidden away in a basket by his mother, Jochebed, who dares to defy Pharaoh's edict. The child is placed into the Nile, that same river that Pharaoh has used to purge the Hebrew people. But what Pharaoh does not know is that this river will become a pathway to salvation. Moses floats in the basket, carried by the current, drawn to a fate that is already written by God. And in the most unlikely of places, Moses is found. Pharaoh's daughter, a princess raised in the luxury of Egypt's courts, stumbles upon the basket. Moved by compassion, she takes the child and raises him as her own. Pharaoh's decree, meant to rid Egypt of the Hebrew children, instead sets in motion a chain of events that will forever alter the fate of both Egypt and Israel. Moses, raised in Pharaoh's house, grows up as a prince of Egypt, surrounded by luxury, education, and power. But even in the midst of Egypt's splendor, Moses' heart is not with the royal family. His heart is with his people, the Hebrews who labor under the oppressive hand of Pharaoh.
As Moses matures, the conflict within him deepens. He is torn between two worlds, the world of the Egyptian elite and the world of his Hebrew kin. One day, while witnessing an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, Moses can no longer ignore the suffering of his people. His fury boils over, and in a moment of rash anger, he strikes down the taskmaster, killing him in defense of the slave. The act is impulsive, born of anger and righteousness, but it is a moment that will shape Moses' destiny. The Pharaoh learns of Moses' crime and orders his death. Moses, fearing for his life, flees Egypt, abandoning the royal life for a life of exile. Moses' flight to the desert is the beginning of a new chapter. In the wilderness of Midian, far from the power of Egypt, Moses begins his life anew. But even in exile, Moses is not free from God's plan. One day, while tending to his flock, Moses encounters a sight that will change his life forever. A burning bush, a flame, but not consumed by the fire. From the bush comes the voice of God, calling Moses by name. God speaks to Moses, revealing that it is time for the Hebrews to be freed. Moses, the man who once fled Egypt in fear, is now called to return, not as a prince of Egypt, but as the deliverer of God's people. God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh and demand the release of the Hebrews. Moses, reluctant but obedient, receives his divine commission. He will return to the land of his birth, to face the very Pharaoh who sought his life, to confront the tyrant who has kept God's people enslaved for generations. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Hebrews continued to suffer. Their cries rise to heaven, but it seems that God is silent. Yet God has not forgotten them. As Moses stands at the burning bush, God assures him that he has heard the cries of his people, and the time for their deliverance has come. The covenant made with Abraham, passed down through Isaac and Jacob, is about to be fulfilled. The Hebrews, slaves in Egypt for over 400 years, will finally be set free.
Moses' return to Egypt is the beginning of a dramatic confrontation with Pharaoh. Armed with nothing but God's command, Moses stands before the ruler of the most powerful empire the world has ever known. But Pharaoh's heart is hard, and he refuses to let the Hebrews go. A battle of wills ensues, a battle that will see plagues unleashed upon Egypt. The Nile will turn to blood. Frogs, locusts, and darkness will sweep across the land. The people of Egypt will witness firsthand the power of the God of Israel, a power that no king, no army, no empire can withstand. The Hebrews, still enslaved, feel the weight of their oppression. But in the face of Pharaoh's refusal, they begin to sense the coming of something greater, a deliverance that will carry them from the depths of slavery into the freedom of the Promised Land. The story of Hebrew slavery in Egypt is not just the tale of a people oppressed. It is the beginning of a revolution, a divine act of redemption. Through Moses, the once helpless child hidden in a basket, God will raise a leader who will defy the might of Egypt, challenge the power of Pharaoh, and lead his people out of bondage. The foundation for the Exodus is being laid, and though the path to freedom will be long and fraught with danger, it begins now, with Moses' return, with Pharaoh's resistance, and with the unshakable faith of a people whose cries have reached the heavens. This is the birth of Israel as a nation, not born in battle or conquest, but in the power of God's promise. The Hebrews will be freed, and they will march toward a future they cannot yet see, a future where the land of Canaan, flowing with milk and honey, awaits them.
One day, as Moses tends to his flock, the familiar desert horizon reveals something strange, an unspeakable vision that will alter the course of his life. In the heart of the wilderness of Horeb, around circa 1300 BCE, a bush burns but does not burn up. The flames leap, flicker, and dance, but the bush remains whole, untouched by fire. In this moment, everything shifts. The voice of God calls to him, "Moses, Moses." The voice is unmistakable, unmistakably divine, and it commands Moses to approach. "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Moses, trembling, removes his sandals, the reality of what is happening beginning to settle into his bones. This is no ordinary event. This is divine intervention. God speaks, and the world, once distant, is now palpably close. God identifies himself as the one who is, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Moses' forefathers. And then, in the fire,
God tells Moses of a plan so grand it will reshape history. I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries. I am sending you to bring them out of Egypt. Moses is not called to lead an army. He is not called to conquer, but to deliver. The weight of this task crashes down on him. Pharaoh, the mightiest ruler on earth, is his opponent. The Israelites, once his kin, have lived under the yoke of slavery for generations. And Moses, a mere shepherd, is the one chosen to lead them out. Doubt creeps into Moses' heart. "Who am I?" he asks. The hesitation is clear. Who is he to face Pharaoh? What could he possibly offer to liberate a nation? But God's answer is simple. I will be with you. And with that, Moses' journey begins, not as a prince, but as a servant, chosen to be the vessel for divine deliverance. Though hesitant and unsure, Moses returns to Egypt, a man with nothing but faith in the God who called him. Moses' return to Egypt marks the beginning of a battle of wills. The proud and powerful Pharaoh, ruler of the most advanced empire in the world, will now stand face to face with the will of the Almighty. Moses enters Egypt, not as a fugitive, but as a leader of God's people. The first words Moses speaks to Pharaoh are simple yet defiant. "Let my people go." Pharaoh's response is as arrogant as it is predictable. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him?" Pharaoh asks, mocking the very idea of a deity that could challenge his absolute power.
This sets the stage for the plagues, divine retribution unleashed upon Egypt, each plague a decisive act of judgment. The land of Egypt, once bathed in prosperity and might, will now be shaken by the wrath of the God of Israel. The plagues are not random, they are a message, a divine calling card. Each one strikes at the heart of Egypt's gods and culture, an unraveling of the empire's very fabric. The first plague, the Nile turns to blood, turning Egypt's lifeblood into death. The very river that once brought Egypt life now brings it destruction. Fish die, the water becomes undrinkable, and Egypt groans under the weight of God's judgment. The second plague, frogs, once a symbol of fertility, invade every corner of Egypt. Their croaks fill the air, their bodies pile up in the streets. The land is overwhelmed by the amphibious onslaught. The third plague, dust becomes gnats, and the earth itself seems to rebel. Every man, woman, and beast is covered by the tiny biting creatures that spread like wildfire. The fourth plague, flies swarm across Egypt, filling every home, every place of worship. The very air of Egypt becomes a suffocating cloud of destruction. And still, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. The plagues fall, one after another, devastating the land, but Pharaoh's pride and resistance remain unbroken. Each plague brings Egypt closer to ruin, but Pharaoh, blind to the power of God, refuses to release the Hebrews. The plagues continue, boils, hail, and locusts, until the very air of Egypt trembles with the force of divine wrath. The empire that once commanded the heavens and the earth now lies broken beneath the weight of God's power. The final plague is the most devastating of all. Death passes over Egypt, striking down every firstborn in the land. The cry of Egypt rises to the heavens, the wails of mothers and fathers who lose their children. Yet where the blood of the Lamb has been painted on the doorposts of the Hebrews, death passes over. The Hebrews are spared, protected by the blood of the covenant, a sign of God's deliverance. The moment is undeniable. Pharaoh's pride has been shattered. His empire lies in ruins. He calls for Moses and demands that the Hebrews leave immediately. "Go, take your people, and leave Egypt." The Hebrews, now freed, march out of Egypt, their heads held high. But their journey has just begun.
As the Israelites flee, they come to the shores of the Red Sea. Ahead of them lies an impossible barrier, an ocean vast and unyielding. Behind them, Pharaoh's army closes in, desperate for revenge. The Israelites are trapped, surrounded by water and death. But God, who has brought them this far, will not abandon them. Moses stretches his hand over the sea, and the waters part. The sea, once an impenetrable barrier, now stands as a wall of water on either side, the ground beneath their feet dry. The Israelites walk through the sea, their path carved by the hand of God. As they reach the other shore, Pharaoh's army follows, but the waters come crashing down, swallowing the Egyptian chariots and soldiers. In this moment, the Red Sea becomes a symbol of liberation, a divine intervention that clears the path to freedom. The Israelites are no longer slaves. They are a people of destiny, chosen to inherit the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Exodus is not just the end of slavery, it is the birth of a nation. The Israelites are no longer slaves. They are God's people, destined to live under His covenant. The journey to the Promised Land will be long, but it begins with this moment, freedom won not by might, but by the hand of God. The Israelites, led by Moses, now march forward into the unknown. The Promised Land lies ahead, but they have much to learn. Their faith will be tested. Their trust in God will be challenged, but they will never again be slaves. Their deliverance has come, and through Moses, they will begin their journey to the land of promise. The journey from Egypt to the Promised Land is not one of straight paths or swift victories. It is a wilderness of both sand and soul, stretching across the barren desert for 40 years. Israel's faith will be tested, their spirit challenged, and their resolve strained beneath the weight of a vast, unforgiving landscape. The Exodus from Egypt, a triumphant break from slavery, is now only the beginning of a longer journey. For the Israelites, the Promised Land lies far in the distance, just beyond their grasp.
The desert is not just an expanse of shifting dunes and scorching sun. It is a crucible. It is a place where the faith of the Israelites will be refined. What began in freedom will soon become a test of how they can live by faith, trusting in God's provision and obedience to His commands. In the wilderness, they will be forced to confront not just their physical needs, but their inner doubts, their fears, and their reliance on God. Every morning, the Israelites wake to the miraculous sight of manna covering the ground. It is not the bread of Egypt, not the rich feasts of Pharaoh's court, but it is sustenance. This strange, dew-like substance is their only food. For 40 years it will be their daily bread. The people gather what they need, but no more, for it will not last beyond the day. Their trust in God's provision will grow. Today's meal is enough for today. The Israelites learn that to be free is not simply to have abundance, but to rely on God for what they need each day. Yet even this miraculous provision is not enough to satisfy their cravings. The people grow restless, hungry for the foods of Egypt, fish, cucumbers, leeks, and the garlic they left behind. They grumble against Moses, their leader, accusing him of bringing them out of Egypt just to die in the wilderness. Their longing for the past, their yearning for the comforts of slavery, threaten to unravel the very faith that brought them to this point. But God does not forsake them. Even in their complaints, He provides. When they thirst, God commands Moses to strike a rock, and water pours forth. Once again, God meets their need in a way that defies human expectation, providing for them not just once, but every time their thirst arises. This is not just about water. It is about trusting God when the resources seem scarce. Yet, even in the face of God's provision, the people struggle. Their journey is not just a walk across the desert. It is a wrestling match with God and with themselves. Every test, every trial is an opportunity for them to learn what it means to trust. Yet, as their faith falters, they begin to question Moses, question God, question their very purpose. Are they truly free, or are they wandering in circles, doomed to be lost forever?
Amidst the desert's challenges, God gives Moses a command. The people will build a tabernacle, a place for God's presence to dwell among them. The tabernacle is more than just a tent. It is a visible sign that God is with them, guiding them, leading them through the wilderness. It is where they will offer sacrifices, where the Ark of the Covenant will reside, and where the Shekinah glory of God will manifest. The tabernacle is a constant reminder. Israel is chosen, they are set apart, and they are bound by a covenant with the one who delivered them. Yet, as the tabernacle is being built, their faith is tested. They must give generously, they must obey the instructions God has given. But the people's hearts are often divided. Idolatry lurks in the shadows of their hearts as the allure of Egypt's gods calls to them. The golden calf incident becomes a stark reminder that, while the tabernacle represents God's presence, it is not the place that saves them, but the faith in God that resides within. While Moses is atop Mount Sinai, receiving the commandments of God, the people grow impatient. The mountain looms above them, shrouded in cloud and fire, but the people below, unsure and anxious, begin to lose hope. They demand that Aaron, Moses' brother, create a God they can see, a God they can touch. In their impatience, they cast a golden calf, an idol they can worship. They throw a feast, sacrificing to the golden calf and bow before it in sin. When Moses descends, he is furious. The stone tablets in his hands shatter as he witnesses the people's betrayal. The covenant broken by their rebellion must be restored. But even in their failure, God shows mercy. Moses intercedes on their behalf, and God renews his covenant. Yet the people's actions have consequences. Judgment falls on those who participated in the idolatry, and the Israelites learn that faith cannot be half-hearted. It must be whole, complete, and pure. For the next 38 years, Israel will continue their journey through the desert. The first generation, the one that left Egypt, will never see the promised land. Their disobedience, their rebellion, will cost them. They are doomed to wander in the wilderness until the next generation is ready. The second generation, those born in the desert, will be the ones to cross the Jordan River into the land God promised their forefathers. But even this new generation is not free from the tests of the wilderness. As they march toward their destiny, they face enemies, hunger, and doubt. The wilderness remains a place of growth and transformation. It is where Israel learns to live by faith, to trust in God's provision, and to wrestle with their own unbelief.
The people of Israel stand on the edge of the promised land. They have crossed the wilderness, but they have not yet entered the land that God promised to their ancestors. The final test is yet to come. As Moses prepares to pass leadership to Joshua, the question remains, will Israel rise to the challenge, or will they falter, as they did in the past? The wilderness has been a place of trial, but it has also been a place of preparation. The people who were once slaves are now a nation. They are God's chosen people, ready to enter the land He promised. Yet the question hangs in the air like the desert heat. Will they trust God fully? Will they enter into the covenant God has given them? Or will they once again turn back to what they know, to the old ways of bondage? The people of Israel stand at the Jordan River, the boundary between the wilderness and the promised land. The land promised to their forefathers is within their reach, yet the river before them is wide and deep. Will they step forward in faith, trusting in God's promise? Or will they let fear and doubt keep them from the future God has ordained?
The wilderness is behind them, but the greatest challenge of all lies just ahead. What lies beyond the Jordan? The answer will shape the future of Israel and the nations that follow. The story of Israel's faith is about to take a new turn, one that will define not just their future, but the future of the entire world.
Joshua stands at the threshold of a new beginning, the promised land now within reach. The land is given, but the battles ahead will test every inch of faith. The Israelites are not entering a land of peace. It is full of giants, armies that tower over them, gods that demand allegiance, and cities fortified by years of conquest. God's promise is clear. The land is theirs. But victory will require more than swords and shields. It will demand absolute trust in God's word. By circa 1250 BCE, after 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites stand ready to take possession of Canaan. The Exodus is complete, but the journey to true freedom has only just begun. The promise made to Abraham is now a call to arms, and Joshua, appointed by God to lead, stands as the man who will fulfill that promise. The battles are not mere skirmishes. They are moments where the future of Israel will be sealed. The first challenge Israel faces is the Jordan River. With Canaan just across the water, the river swells with the spring rains, blocking their path. But God, who parted the Red Sea for them in the past, now commands Joshua to step into the water. As their feet touch the river, the waters part, and Israel walks through on dry ground, a miraculous sign that God is with them. This is not just a river crossing. This is a divine declaration that God's promises are trustworthy and victory is assured for those who walk by faith. As Israel enters Canaan, they do so with the power of God behind them, the river behind them, and the land of promise ahead. Their first step is not only into Canaan, but into a future where they will no longer be wanderers. They will be a nation under God, possessing the land He has given them. The first city to face Israel's army is Jericho. Its massive walls tower high above the Israelites, seeming invulnerable. But God's strategy is unconventional. Instead of a battle of force, He commands Israel to march around the city for 6 days. On the 7th day, they are to shout and blow trumpets. The people follow God's command, each step a testament to their faith. On the 7th day, the trumpets blare, the people shout, and the walls of Jericho collapse, as if the earth itself yielded to the will of God.
The fall of Jericho is Israel's first victory in Canaan, a victory that has nothing to do with military might and everything to do with obedience to God's will. Jericho, once a fortress filled with fear, now lies in ruins, and Israel moves forward. With each victory, they claim more than just land. They claimed the future God promised to Abraham and his descendants. But victory is not always immediate. After Jericho falls, Israel moves on to Ai, a smaller city that seems an easy target. However, despite their initial success, Israel suffers a stunning defeat. The army of Ai defeats them, and they are forced to retreat. Why did this happen? Why, after such a triumph at Jericho, does Israel fall? The answer is revealed when God speaks to Joshua. Sin has entered the camp. One man, Achan, has taken what was forbidden from Jericho, gold and silver, and hidden it. Achan's sin causes Israel's defeat. But this failure is not the end. It is a lesson in the importance of obedience. Israel deals with the sin, and with God's help, they are able to take Ai in a second attempt, and this time, victory is assured. The city falls, and Israel learns a vital lesson. Victory comes only through faithfulness to God's commands. As Israel advances, the kings of Canaan unite against them, forming a coalition in the south. But one by one, these cities fall to Israel's advancing army. In a swift series of battles,
Israel captures Hebron, Lachish, and Debir, cities that were once strongholds in the south. The southern kings may have united, but they are no match for the God of Israel, who leads his people to victory. The victories in the south are crucial. They mark the moment when Israel's presence in Canaan becomes undeniable. But the northern cities, led by the king of Hazor, pose a greater threat. This time, the northern coalition gathers its forces for a final stand. The battle for Hazor is fierce, but once again, Israel prevails. The northern armies are crushed, and Hazor is burned to the ground. The northern kingdom falls, and with it, the last major resistance to Israel's claim to the promised land is destroyed. The conquest is nearly complete, but Israel must still take possession of the land. As Joshua divides the land among the tribes of Israel, the promise made to Abraham begins to take physical shape. The 12 tribes are given their inheritance, each tribe receiving its portion of Canaan. The land that was once occupied by giants, idols, and armies is now Israel's. The Ark of the Covenant is placed in Shiloh, marking the center of worship for the nation. This is the land God swore to give to his people, and now they stand in it, free, victorious, and blessed.
But even as they claim the land, Israel's work is not done. The land is theirs, but the people must still remain faithful. The Canaanite influence is still strong, and the temptation to worship the gods of the land is ever present. As Israel enters this new chapter, the challenge is clear. Will they remain faithful to God, or will they be led astray by the idols and false gods of Canaan? The land is taken, the battles are won, but Israel stands on the edge of something even more important. Will they remain faithful to the covenant that God made with them? The promised land is theirs, but their ability to hold on to it will depend not on their strength in battle, but on their commitment to the God who delivered them. Joshua's final words echo in the hearts of the Israelites. Choose this day whom you will serve. The land is now theirs, but their journey has just begun. The conquest of Canaan is complete, but the greater battle, for faith, is about to unfold. The promised land is now divided, but peace remains elusive. With no king, Israel is ruled by judges, leaders raised by God in times of crisis. Their authority is not born of bloodline, but of divine calling. The land is claimed, but it is full of giants, in armies, in idols, and in human hearts. Every judge is a deliverer, but their story is not just of victory, it is also one of the people's constant turning away from God. In circa 1200 BCE, the Israelites are a disjointed nation, a collection of tribes that have conquered the land, but have yet to conquer themselves. They face oppression from the surrounding nations, yet their greatest enemy is within, a lack of faith and an unwillingness to stay true to the covenant God established with their forefathers. And so God raises up leaders, each judge a vessel of deliverance in the face of Israel's repeated rebellion. When Deborah, a prophetess and judge, arises around circa 1200 BCE, Israel is under the oppressive rule of King Jabin of Hazor, whose forces, led by the commander Sisera, are overwhelming. Israel's faith has faltered, and oppression is the consequence. But Deborah will not let Israel's faith die. She commands Barak, a military leader, to assemble an army and confront Sisera. But Barak, lacking faith, demands Deborah's presence. She agrees, but delivers a prophecy: the glory of victory will go to a woman. In battle, God turns the tide. The Canaanite forces are thrown into disarray as Deborah leads with divine authority. Sisera flees, only to be slain by Jael, a woman who drives a tent peg through his skull. Deborah's leadership is more than military. It is a spiritual renewal for Israel. Yet even in victory, the temptation to idolatry lingers. The cycle is not broken, it is merely paused. By circa 1180 BCE, The Israelites once again fall into idolatry and are oppressed by the Midianites. The Midianites ravage Israel's crops, leaving them hungry and helpless. Gideon, hiding in a winepress, is called by God to deliver Israel. Gideon is reluctant, questioning why God would choose him, but God assures him that his power is enough. Gideon's faith is tested. He begins with an army of 32,000 men, but God reduces it to just 300, a symbolic number, to prove that the victory will not be by might, but by God's power alone. Armed only with trumpets and torches, Gideon and his men surround the Midianite camp. At the sound of the trumpet, the Midianites panic, and God sends them into confusion. They turn on each other, and Israel claims victory, once again not by their own strength, but by faith in God's command. But the victory is bittersweet. Despite their triumph, the people ask Gideon to rule over them, but Gideon refuses, reminding them that God is their king. His reign, if it had begun, would have been one of obedience to God, but Israel's hearts remain divided, and idolatry is still their constant temptation. The final judge, Samson, is one of the most tragic figures in Israel's history. Set apart as a Nazirite, his strength is unmatched. His birth is foretold, and he is dedicated to God from the womb. But Samson is driven by personal desires, particularly his infatuation with the Philistine women. His greatest enemy is not the Philistines. It is his own weakness and unfaithfulness. Throughout his life, Samson's strength is used against the Philistines. He slays a lion with his bare hands, defeats an army with the jawbone of a donkey, and carries the gates of Gaza on his shoulders. But with each victory, his heart drifts further from God. The Philistine woman, Delilah, ultimately betrays him, and Samson is captured after revealing the secret of his strength, his uncut hair. They gouge out his eyes, and he is bound in chains, a shell of the warrior he once was. But in his final moments, Samson calls to God. His hair begins to grow back, and with one last surge of strength, he brings down the temple of Dagon, killing himself along with thousands of Philistines. Samson's death is a final, desperate victory, but it comes at the cost of his life. His story is a tragic reminder of the danger of compromise, the cost of pride, and the fallibility of even the most gifted individuals.
The period of the Judges, circa 1200 BCE to 1020 BCE, is defined by a repetitive cycle. The Israelites fall into sin, they are oppressed, and then God raises up a judge to deliver them. Once the judge dies, the cycle begins again. The people forget their God, turning to idols, and God's judgment brings oppression. Then they cry out, and God raises a deliverer. This cycle reveals a deeper spiritual truth. Israel's problems are not merely external, they are internal. It is their hearts that need to be changed. The judges, Deborah, Gideon, Samson, are not just military leaders, they are symbols of Israel's need for a permanent solution. The people are constantly looking for a king, someone to rule them, but they are not yet ready for the monarchy that will come. Their faith falters when the judge is no longer there to lead them. As the period of the judges ends, the people of Israel are at a crossroads. The judges have led them in times of crisis, but the need for a permanent solution is clear. Israel's leadership has been inconsistent, marked by spiritual highs and lows. The cycle of sin and deliverance cannot continue forever. Israel must decide, will they continue in disobedience, or will they follow God wholeheartedly? God's people are about to face a decision that will change the course of their future. A king is coming, but the question remains, will Israel be ready for a king who will lead them not just in battle, but in faith? The land is claimed, but peace is not theirs. Israel has no king, only judges,
leaders raised up by God to guide them through times of crisis. But after years of cycles, rebellion, oppression, deliverance, the people cry out for a king. They want to be like the nations around them, to have a visible ruler, someone to lead them into battle. Their demand is clear: give us a king. God's heart grieves. He has been their king, leading them from the Exodus, through the wilderness, and into the promised land. Yet the people reject him. They are not satisfied with divine sovereignty. They want a king they can see. The cry echoes across the land: we need a king. In circa 1050 BCE, God gives Israel what they demand: Saul, a man who stands head and shoulders above everyone else, physically perfect for the role. Saul is tall, strong, and initially full of promise. He is anointed by Samuel, the last judge of Israel, a reluctant prophet whose heart is broken by the people's demand. Saul's reign begins with hope, a new era for Israel, but it will not be the salvation they expect.
At first, Saul's victories are undeniable. The Ammonites are defeated, the Philistines pushed back. Israel feels the weight of God's blessing upon them, and for a moment, it seems like the monarchy might succeed. But as Saul's power grows, so does his pride. He is torn between obedience to God and the temptation of self-reliance. Saul's disobedience comes to a head when he spares the Amalekite king and the best of the spoils, an act that goes directly against God's command. When confronted by Samuel, Saul tries to justify himself, but the damage is done. God rejects Saul as king. The monarchy begins with the hope of a united Israel, but it will end in failure. A kingdom lost because of pride, and a king rejected for his disobedience. As Saul's reign unravels, David emerges. David, once a mere shepherd, is anointed by Samuel, the man who mourns for the loss of Saul. David is young, humble, and obedient, everything Saul was not. By circa 1020 BCE, David's fame grows, first with the defeat of Goliath, the giant that no one dared face. A simple sling and a stone, yet with each victory, the people sing of David's prowess. Saul becomes jealous, the very thing he feared most. The Spirit of God leaves Saul, and he is tormented by an evil spirit, while David's rise is unstoppable. David's story is one of faith, but also struggle. He is pursued by Saul, who grows more paranoid and irrational. Yet even in the face of Saul's madness, David remains faithful to God's timing. He spares Saul's life twice, unwilling to kill the Lord's anointed, showing the difference between the faith of a king chosen by God and a king who rules in his own strength. David's kingship is inevitable, and though Saul's reign continues for several more years, the kingdom belongs to David. Saul's failure leads Israel to the king it always needed, a man after God's own heart. The monarchy begins, but Israel's true king is still unseen. Saul, the first king, is rejected for his disobedience, and David, the second, is rising. The kingdom of Israel is divided between the legacy of Saul's failure and the hope of David's obedience. God's sovereignty is still the unseen thread holding Israel together, but the nation is about to face a new challenge. Will David's faithfulness hold, or will the temptations of the throne lead him astray?
Israel's first king is anointed, Saul, tall, strong, and chosen by God. In circa 1050 BCE, Saul rises to power with the hopes of an entire nation resting on his shoulders. The people of Israel, once ruled by judges, finally have the king they demanded. At first, Saul is everything they had hoped for: a warrior, a leader, and a man with the favor of God. The early days of his reign are filled with triumph. The Ammonites are crushed in battle, and Israel begins to unite under Saul's rule. There is hope. There is promise. But Saul's reign, though filled with potential, begins to unravel as the darker shadows of pride, disobedience, and jealousy take root. It begins with small cracks, a failure here, a half-hearted obedience there, but soon these cracks widen and Saul's kingdom begins to fracture. As God's anointed, Saul's path should be marked by unwavering obedience to the divine will. Yet Saul's actions become increasingly marked by self-interest and a desire to control his own fate. In circa 1045 BCE, God commands Saul to utterly destroy the Amalekites, their king, Agag, and all of their possessions as a judgment for their past sin. The task is clear: complete destruction. But Saul, unable to fully obey God, spares Agag and keeps the best of the spoils for himself. When Samuel confronts him, Saul offers flimsy excuses, claiming the spoils were to be used for sacrifice. But God rejects Saul. Samuel, broken-hearted, tells Saul that his kingdom will be taken from him. The first king of Israel has been rejected, and the divine favor that once rested on Saul begins to fade. The kingdom that Saul had hoped to build, one marked by divine guidance, is now teetering on the edge of collapse. Samuel's words echo in Saul's ears, but the seeds of pride and self-reliance have already taken root. Saul's actions are a clear sign that despite his external victories, his heart is far from God. This moment marks the beginning of the unraveling of Saul's reign, a reign that should have been rooted in obedience to God, but is now characterized by selfishness and fear.
In the same year Saul's disobedience is exposed, David, the youngest son of Jesse, is anointed as the next king of Israel by Samuel, in secret. David, a mere shepherd, is the man God has chosen to replace Saul. Unlike Saul, David is a man after God's own heart. Though young and untested, David's faith and obedience are the very qualities that will make him Israel's greatest king. David's first great act of courage comes when he defeats Goliath, the Philistine giant, armed only with a sling and a stone. It is a moment of triumph, a victory that shows the power of God working through the humble. But this victory is also the beginning of Saul's growing jealousy. The people begin to sing songs of David's greatness. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Saul cannot bear it. The people's praises for David only fuel the fire of jealousy that burns within Saul. As David's star rises, Saul's fears deepen. He becomes consumed by paranoia. David, once his loyal servant, becomes his greatest enemy. Saul's madness takes root. He hunts David relentlessly, desperate to kill the one who poses a threat to his throne. The once great king is now consumed by fear and hatred, unable to see the future of Israel through the lens of God's plan. In his growing paranoia, Saul's reign becomes marked by irrational decisions. He becomes desperate, and in his desperation, Saul turns to witchcraft, seeking advice from the witch of Endor when God no longer speaks to him. This act alone is the final break from God's will. Saul, in his fear and desperation, seeks guidance from the dark arts, rejecting the very God who once called him to lead. Meanwhile, David continues to rise. Even as Saul hunts him like an animal, David refuses to harm the king. He has opportunities to kill Saul, but chooses to trust in God's timing, refusing to lay a hand on God's anointed. David's humility stands in stark contrast to Saul's pride. While Saul grows more irrational and desperate, David remains steadfast, knowing that his time will come, but only in God's timing. Saul's mental state deteriorates, and his kingdom begins to fracture. His obsession with David consumes him, and his decisions grow more desperate. He calls on the priests of Nob for help, only to have them massacred when he learns they helped David escape. The king who was once chosen by God to lead his people has now become a shadow of himself, driven by fear and self-preservation.
By circa 1010 BCE, Saul's fate is sealed. The final battle occurs at Mount Gilboa against the Philistines. Saul, once a mighty warrior, faces defeat. His army is overwhelmed, and he is gravely wounded. With his death imminent, Saul falls on his sword, choosing suicide over capture. The first king of Israel is gone, his reign ending in defeat, a kingdom lost to pride, disobedience, and fear. The death of Saul is a tragic end to what could have been a promising reign. The people mourn, but the hope for Israel's future now rests with David, the man after God's own heart. Saul's legacy is one of unfulfilled potential. The nation that could have been unified under a king of God's choosing now stands divided, broken by the failures of its first king. With Saul's death, the throne of Israel passes to David, but the road ahead is not without its challenges. Saul's legacy still haunts Israel, and David's ascent to the throne will not be easy. Saul's supporters still remain, and they will not relinquish power without a fight. Israel stands at the edge of a new era, but will David rise as the king Israel needs? Or will the same pitfalls that doomed Saul haunt his reign? The kingdom of Israel is broken, divided, and the future of the monarchy is uncertain. David is the anointed king, but his reign is just beginning. Will he succeed where Saul failed, or will the curse of pride and fear continue to plague Israel's future? The true test of Israel's monarchy is yet to come. From a humble shepherd boy to the king of Israel, David's rise is the stuff of legend. Chosen by God, David's path is marked by faith and obedience, but also by betrayal, war, and heartbreak. His journey begins in Bethlehem, where as the youngest son of Jesse, he is overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. Yet God sees what others cannot, a heart after his own. In circa 1010 BCE, Samuel anoints David, setting him apart for a destiny that will shape the future of Israel. David's first defining moment comes when he defeats Goliath, the Philistine giant, in circa 1020 BCE. Armed with nothing but a sling and stones, David steps into the battlefield to face the towering warrior who has taunted Israel for days. The entire Israelite army, paralyzed with fear, watches as David, a mere shepherd, marches forward. The stone flies, and with one hit, Goliath falls. The Philistines retreat in terror, and Israel's victory is sealed. But more than just a military triumph, David's victory is God's intervention, showing that victory is not determined by size or strength, but by obedience and faith. David is thrust into the limelight, a hero. But Saul, the reigning king, watches with growing envy. The people now sing of David's victories, and Saul's jealousy turns into paranoia. The young warrior, once an ally, becomes his greatest threat. As David's fame grows, Saul's jealousy deepens. Saul begins to see David not as a servant of God, but as a threat to his throne. Driven by fear and pride, Saul seeks to destroy David, sending soldiers to hunt him down. David, though anointed as Israel's future king, fleeing for his life, finds refuge in caves, living as a fugitive. Despite the opportunities to kill Saul, David shows mercy, refusing to harm the king, God's anointed.
This decision reveals David's obedience and trust in God's timing. Saul, meanwhile, grows more erratic and desperate, seeking counsel from the Witch of Endor, an act that marks his final rejection by God. Saul is a king tormented by fear, while David is protected by God. In circa 1010 BCE, Saul meets his tragic end. In a final battle against the Philistines at Mount Gilboa, Saul's army is routed. Saul is gravely wounded, and in his final moments, he falls on his sword rather than face capture. Israel mourns, but the kingdom is left without a leader. Saul's tragic end marks the fall of a once promising reign, consumed by fear, pride, and disobedience. With Saul's death, David steps into his destiny. In the wake of Saul's downfall, the tribe of Judah immediately anoints David as their king. The nation, however, remains divided. Saul's surviving son, Ishbosheth, is crowned king of Israel by the northern tribes, and civil war erupts. David, though a man after God's own heart, must now fight for what God has promised him. His path to the throne is not handed to him easily. Despite the years of running and persecution, David's reign begins with God's blessing. David's strength lies not in his military might, but in his obedience to God. As the fighting continues, David's enemies fall one by one. God's favor is evident in every battle, and slowly but surely, the united kingdom of Israel begins to take shape. By circa 1005 BCE, after the assassination of Ishbosheth, Israel unites under David's rule. He becomes the undisputed king of a single unified Israel, and his first act as king is to capture Jerusalem. The city, previously under Jebusite control, is transformed into Israel's political and spiritual capital. David's Jerusalem becomes the heart of the nation, symbolizing the new unity and divine favor that rests on his kingdom. David's military victories continue, and Israel begins to flourish under his leadership. But David's heart is not just set on war and conquest. He desires to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, to make the city a place of worship and God's dwelling. This act marks the beginning of a spiritual revival for Israel. David's desire to build a temple for God is not realized in his lifetime, but his deep devotion to God's presence will shape the nation for generations to come.
Though David's reign is marked by success and prosperity, it is also a reign of repentance. His faith is unwavering, but his humanity is evident. The story of his affair with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah cast a dark shadow over his kingship. When confronted by the prophet Nathan, David is filled with remorse and repents. His heart, which has always been after God, is broken by the weight of his sin, and his prayers of repentance become some of the most poignant and powerful in the Psalms. David's reign, therefore, is one of victory, but also brokenness. He seeks to build God's house, but is reminded that his own house is not without fault. His life is a reflection of the human condition, marked by divine favor, but also plagued by personal failures. Yet it is in these moments of repentance that David's heart for God is most evident. David's reign has brought peace and prosperity to Israel, but the kingdom remains fragile. His son, Solomon, will inherit the throne, but will the next generation hold to the same faithfulness that defined David? David's legacy is secure, but the path ahead is uncertain. Will Israel continue to walk in obedience to God, or will the kingdom fall into the same cycles of disobedience that marked the reigns of those before David? As David prepares for his final days, the question remains, will Israel's true king, the one who reigns forever, come through the lineage of David, or will the weight of the kingdom crush the promise God made to his servant? Solomon, David's son, inherits a kingdom at peace, a kingdom of unprecedented prosperity and unity. In circa 970 BCE, he ascends to the throne with the wisdom of God guiding his every step. The temple in Jerusalem stands as a towering testament to Israel's greatness, a symbol of God's presence among his people. Solomon's reign begins with hope for Israel's future, hope for a kingdom united under the banner of faith. But as the years pass, that hope starts to fade. Solomon's heart drifts away from God, drawn by the allure of wealth, power, and foreign alliances. The seeds of division are sown, and a kingdom once bound by unity begins to fracture. The prosperity that defined Solomon's reign becomes the very thing that leads to his downfall.
At the beginning of his reign, Solomon is everything Israel needs, a wise king chosen by God. He rules with justice, settles disputes, and builds the temple, bringing glory to God. Solomon's wisdom becomes legendary. Rulers from across the ancient world come to Jerusalem to seek his counsel, marveling at his insight. Israel flourishes under his leadership. Trade routes open, bringing gold, spices, and wealth from far-flung corners of the world. Solomon's riches know no bounds, and Jerusalem becomes a city of unmatched grandeur. The temple in Jerusalem becomes the center of Israel's worship, housing the Ark of the Covenant and solidifying God's presence with his people. Solomon stands as the epitome of Israel's strength and unity. For a time, there is no king like Solomon. The kingdom is secure, and Israel is at peace. But the very wealth that brought Israel prosperity becomes the foundation for Solomon's failure. In his quest for power, Solomon forms political alliances with neighboring nations. He marries many foreign women, including the daughter of Pharaoh, solidifying ties with Egypt. With each marriage, Solomon's kingdom grows, but so does the influence of foreign gods and idolatry. By circa 950 BCE, Solomon's heart turns. The king who once built a house for God now tolerates the worship of false gods. His wives bring their idols with them, and Solomon, instead of staying faithful to the God who gave him wisdom and wealth, allows these idols to take root in Israel. He builds high places for the worship of Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and other foreign deities. This sin begins the unraveling of Solomon's reign. The consequences of Solomon's disobedience are swift. In 931 BCE, God sends the prophet Ahijah to deliver a message. The kingdom will be torn in two. Solomon's sin, his turning to idolatry, and his failure to remain faithful to the Lord leads to the kingdom's division. God tells Solomon that he will take the kingdom from his son, Rehoboam, and give it to Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials. This prophecy marks the beginning of Israel's decline. Solomon's sin prepares the ground for the division of Israel into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The kingdom David fought to unite is now on the brink of fracture, and Solomon's failure paves the way for the splitting of Israel. Solomon's reign ends in 931 BCE, and his son Rehoboam takes the throne. The people of Israel, weary from heavy taxes and forced labor, ask Rehoboam to lighten their burden. The new king, however, listens to the advice of his younger, more arrogant counselors and refuses. Rehoboam's decision to increase the burden leads to rebellion. The 10 northern tribes reject Rehoboam and crown Jeroboam as their king, leaving the southern kingdom of Judah under Rehoboam's rule. The kingdom that Solomon once united is now divided. Israel is split between north and south, and the seeds of division that began with Solomon's idolatry bear fruit in civil war and strife. Solomon's prosperity gave way to idolatry, and his legacy becomes a bitter reminder of the cost of turning away from God. As Solomon's death marks the end of an era, the kingdom of Israel faces an uncertain future. The once glorious reign of Solomon, built on wealth and wisdom, has now split into two rival kingdoms.
Israel and Judah are divided, and the legacy of David is threatened. What will become of God's promise to establish a kingdom through David's line? As Rehoboam and Jeroboam rule their respective kingdoms, the tension is palpable. The southern kingdom of Judah remains loyal to the Davidic line, but the northern kingdom of Israel follows a new king, and with it, a new path. Will Israel remain faithful to God, or will it fall further into sin, as Solomon's reign foretold? The division of the kingdom has set the stage for the coming conflict and judgment. Israel's future hangs in the balance.
The legacy of David's covenant resounds through the centuries, a promise planted in the very heart of Israel. Though his kingdom is divided, the promise of a descendant who will reign forever remains unshaken, echoed in the lives of kings and prophets alike. Solomon, David's son, rises to the throne with unmatched wisdom and strength, but the seeds of division are sown within his very reign. As his heart turns away from God, the once unified kingdom begins to crack. The throne of David remains, but the road to fulfilling God's promise becomes longer, twisted, and fraught with conflict. The promise that one of David's descendants will reign forever is the cornerstone of Israel's hope, and even as the kingdom fractures into Israel in the north and Judah in the south, that promise echoes louder, sustained through the generations. Yet Israel's division marks the beginning of a long, painful journey, one where the memory of David's reign, filled with both triumph and failure, casts a shadow over the nation's future. In 931 BCE, Solomon's death brings the end of an era. The kingdom that David had united under Solomon's wise and prosperous reign now lies in tatters. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, inherits the throne, but his youthful arrogance and harsh policies lead to rebellion. The northern tribes, weary of heavy taxes and forced labor, turn their backs on the Davidic line. Jeroboam, once a servant of Solomon, becomes their king, and with that, Israel is divided. The north, Israel, becomes a kingdom that, while initially founded on the promise of prosperity, is soon led astray by the sin of idolatry. Jeroboam, in his attempt to consolidate power, establishes golden calves at Bethel and Dan, encouraging the people to worship idols rather than God. The kingdom's fall is immediate. No longer will Israel live under the promise of God's presence, as the idols of the surrounding nations now corrupt the hearts of the people. In Judah, the southern kingdom, Rehoboam retains the throne, but the division sets the tone for future generations. Judah remains faithful to the Davidic covenant, yet the struggle for faithfulness continues as kings rise and fall. The line of David is preserved, but with it comes the pressure of maintaining the faith of a nation divided, both in heart and land. By 722 BCE, the northern kingdom of Israel, led by a succession of wicked kings, falls to the mighty Assyrians. The Assyrian conquest is swift and brutal, and the 10 northern tribes are taken into captivity, scattered across the empire. The kingdom of Israel disappears, never to return in its original form. The 10 tribes lost to history are forever remembered as the lost tribes of Israel, their rebellion and idolatry marking the ultimate price of turning from God's covenant.
For Judah, the fall of Israel is a solemn reminder of the consequences of disobedience. Despite the warnings of prophets like Elijah, Elisha, and Amos, Israel's refusal to turn back to God results in their complete destruction. Judah, however, clings to the remnants of the Davidic line, even though its kings too will face challenges in remaining faithful to God's commands. The southern kingdom of Judah, while preserved in David's line, faces its own set of struggles. The reigns of good kings like Hezekiah and Josiah temporarily bring reform, but the people's heart for God is fickle, and idolatry continues to creep in. Despite moments of repentance and a return to true worship, Judah continues to suffer from the consequences of sin and division. Yet, the Davidic covenant holds firm, reminding Judah of God's promise that a king from David's line would reign forever.
The most pivotal moment comes with the invasion of the Babylonians. In 586 BCE, Judah is conquered, Jerusalem is destroyed, and the temple is burned to the ground. The people of Judah are carried off into exile. The Davidic line, though not destroyed, is scattered, and the promise seems lost. But in this dark hour, the covenant remains. God's promise to David still endures. Even in exile, the prophets speak of hope. Jeremiah prophesies that though the people are scattered, God will gather them again. He speaks of a righteous branch that will rise from the house of David, one who will reign wisely, bringing justice and peace. Ezekiel speaks of a future shepherd who will unite Israel, and Isaiah delivers the most profound vision, a Messiah who will not only restore Israel, but will bring salvation to all nations. These prophecies, though shrouded in mystery, point toward the fulfillment of the Davidic promise.
Israel's hope is no longer in earthly kings, but in the coming Messiah, a descendant of David who will restore what was lost. The Davidic covenant, which seemed broken in the face of Israel's division and Judah's exile, continues to echo, reminding the people that God's promise is not nullified by human failure. As Israel and Judah's history unfolds, the kingdom's division and collapse set the stage for a future restoration. The Davidic covenant, God's promise that a descendant of David would reign forever, seems distant, especially after the Babylonian exile and the disruption of Israel's unity. Yet, the promise of a king who would bring peace and justice remains at the heart of Israel's hope. The question lingers: will the kingdom be restored? Will the Davidic king come not just to unite Israel, but to bring about the true fulfillment of the promise? The messianic hope continues to burn, and with it, the promise of a kingdom that will never end. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into Israel's history and the unbroken covenant of David, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us as we continue exploring the legacy that changed the world. What do you think about the promises made to David and the future of Israel? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter in this incredible journey through history.